Good afternoon to everyone here with us in Suriname at this fourth episode of the conversation on migration in the Caribbean. How can youth be more meaningfully engaged in discussion on climate-induced migration? So we are very welcome and very happy to welcome all of you here in the room, but also on live stream. This conversation is being held on the sidelines of the Regional Conference on Environmental Migration and Disaster Displacement for Caribbean Civil Society Organizations, which begins tomorrow here also at Torarica. So welcome also to those joining us via Zoom and other platforms, such as the live broadcast on STVS and IOM Caribbean. My name is Hélène Glenisson, and I'm very pleased to chair this conference and this event, I am the project officer on migration, environment, and climate change with IOM Caribbean Coordination Office, which operates out of Barbados. In a special way, I would like to welcome our distinctive panelists for today's discussion. Joining us from the Opus Aurae Opus Foundation, VIDS Bureau's Association of Indigenous Village Leaders in Suriname, the Breadfruit Collective, SASOD Guyana, Dominica Association of Persons with Disabilities, Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council, and of course our moderator Iulia Duca, Program Officer on Migration, Environment and Climate Change based at IOM headquarters in Geneva. It is a real pleasure to have you all here with us. We are also honored to have all representatives of the government of the Republic of Suriname, other civil societies, society representatives from Suriname and across the Caribbean, students, media, in particular is STVS, IOM, and other UN staff, including throughout the region and globally that are joining us today online. It is my pleasure now at this time to lead into our first speaker offering the opening remarks, Ms. Chairman Penza. She is as Sustainable Development Goals Youth Ambassador at the Ministry of Labor, Employment, Opportunity and Youth Affairs of the Republic of Suriname. Over to you, Ms. Penza.
So I guess I have to break the ice on the real conversation on migration and climate and migration. A blessed good afternoon to all of you present in the room and the participants joining us online. First of all, I want to thank the IOM Caribbean for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to address you this afternoon on a topic of high importance, a topic we say is an emergency, but do not act upon as an emergency. So I'm happy that we are gathered here today, which is a testimony that is not just about using the word climate emergency, but that we are aware that we have to urgently undertake action against climate change with a series of conversation on migration in the Caribbean, today the focus on youth migration and climate change. As we all know, people have always moved around the world due to conflict, or various economic, social, and cultural reasons, but lately we see that people migrate because of the changes in climate. Because of the changes in climate, which is too much to bear. I'm not saying that the other reasons that cause people to move around the world are less serious, but when it comes to climate change, it means that our action towards nature have forced humanity to abandon a place they call home. In Suriname, we lately experienced extreme flooding and droughts, maybe not as extreme as in other Caribbean nations, and the government in this regard has allocated resources towards the rehabilitations of water pumps, institutional strengthening of institutes responsible for disaster management and training among others. So what can governments do to protect climate migrants, especially our Caribbean governments? Today, we have the opportunity as young people to discuss this issue and come up with solutions for our region and generations. And the upcoming SITS4 conference in Antigua and Barbuda after 10 years will give us another opportunity to reflect on our vulnerabilities as small island development states and low-lying coastal states. I do not want to take too much of your time and conclude by saying that climate or environmental migrants are a global issue affecting the whole world. And all of us who have contributed to climate change should work together to solve this problem. And lastly, for the people who are visiting Suriname, don't forget to spend some of your dollars to support the small businesses selling craft at Wakapasi and the waterfront. And don't forget to try some of our delicious Surinamese foods as well. I wish you all a fruitful meeting, and once again, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Spencer, and thank you very much for the tourist tips. We welcome now our second speaker in this formal segment of the agenda, Ms. Yvette Padosan, the Deputy Director for Climate Change of the Ministry of Spatial Planning and Environment. Unfortunately, she could not join us in person due to health issue, but we have the honor to have her virtually.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the International Organization for Migration in Suriname and International for giving me the opportunity to do the opening remark today at this panel event on behalf of the Ministry of Spatial Planning and Environment. Today, we have gathered here to have fruitful discussions on the future of climate and migration policies. These discussions should take place everywhere and should therefore not be limited to government offices and meeting rooms. But let us bear in mind that there are other important groups, such as the youth, especially the vibrant youth of the Caribbean, brimming with passion, creativity, and the power to change the narrative. Migration and climate change are complex issues with no single and simple solution. Rising sea levels, extreme weather events, droughts, and desertification are forcing people to leave their homes, leading to international displacement and cross-border migration. The impacts of climate change are often felt the most by the low-income and vulnerable communities who have fewer resources to adapt or migrate safely. Climate change is drastically redrawing our world, leading to unprecedented human displacements and exposing humanity to increasing levels of insecurity. The shrinking window of action must aim to achieve two inseparable goals: to sustainably manage our environment and to safeguard everyone's dignity, rights, and livelihoods. Suriname is particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. The country's small population, major economic activities, and infrastructure are concentrated along the low-lying coastal zone. It has already experienced extensive coastal erosion and has suffered damages from heavy rainfall, flooding, higher temperatures during dry seasons, and high winds. According to estimates, a 1 meter rise in sea level would have an impact on 5.6% of Suriname's agricultural area, 6.4% of its GDP, and 7% of its population. Moreover, Indigenous and Maroon communities are at risk, considering the economic situation and location in remote areas where extreme droughts and floods have been recorded in the past years. For Suriname, people migrate mostly for work, safety, and family visits. However, with the long droughts and heavy rains, our Indigenous and Maroon peoples have often no choice but to relocate to other areas, even if they return to their homes afterwards. Having said this, doesn't mean that migration due to climate change is not taking place in Suriname. We can only confirm this if research is done and data is collected regularly especially during the heavy rainfalls, which leads to flooding in the interior. In the end, if the flooding becomes a trend, the government, together with these communities, will have to seriously start thinking of migration to other higher areas permanently. The government of Suriname has set the goal to develop a national policy plan on international migration with strategic priorities and concrete advice. As we set in place a framework to provide for safe, regular, and orderly migration, we must make use of our creativity to address its causes. We need our diverse voices, representing different islands, countries, backgrounds, and experiences. Let's amplify diverse youth voices in climate migration talks, fostering solutions through shared power and intersectional perspective. But voices alone are not enough. The digital age presents us with extraordinary tools to harness the power of the internet, to connect across borders, share knowledge, and crowdfund innovative solutions. Embrace entrepreneurship, develop green businesses, and show the world that sustainability is not just a cost, but a profitable opportunity. The Caribbean can become a global model for youth-driven climate action and migration solutions. Let's work together and use our collective efforts to shape a future where nature thrives, communities are resilient, and no one is left behind. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Patterson, and we truly appreciate you taking the time, even if you are not very well, to be with us this afternoon and to open this conversation on migration in the Caribbean event. Now the formalities are over, and we are about to push our youth upfront and center of this migration and climate change conversation. First, we will flash back to COP28 and present a collective poem from COP28.
We will be the most affected by the decisions made here. We will be the most affected by the decisions made here.
I once demanded patience.
I once demanded recognition.
I once demanded consideration.
I once represented my local youth community.
I once represented myself.
Why is it so hard for us to achieve our goals? As much as we are divided geographically by borders, we are all humans living in the same environment. So we need to privilege solidarity and share, so everyone has something to give. Not only united in ideas, but also in actions.
To recognize indigenous knowledge systems.
To trust, involve, and collaborate with youth.
To learn and voice the views of my community in a space that many of them cannot have a chance to be in. A responsibility I need to honor.
And now I represent a burning and a flooding young continent.
Now I fight for climate justice. Climate action is more than a conference.
It's more than a speech.
It's more than a negotiation.
It's more than a photo op. It's more than a PR stunt. It's more than planned meetings.
It's more than a false hope.
It's more than a promise.
Here's what my community needs: globally binding commitments to emission reduction,
Integration of social equity in climate policies,
and robust financial support for vulnerable nations.
A triumph would be a united front against climate change,
where diverse voices are heard and solutions are implemented collaboratively.
Environmental justice is non-negotiable.
Now I represent an entire community of youths like me.
Now I demand urgency.
Now I demand proactivity and justice.
Now I demand results.
Now I demand Dawawa Fifi.
Environmental justice is non-negotiable.
Climate action is a way of securing our future.
Climate action is a blueprint to adopt for a future without regret.
Climate action is a collective responsibility.
Climate action is a means to survival.
The time for transformative change is now.
The time for transformative
The
change
time
is now.
for transformative change
The time
is
for
now.
transformative
The
change
time for
is now.
transformative
The time for
change
The
is
time
now.
for transformative
now.
change is now.
And now, with these words on climate justice and climate action, I am pleased to hand you over to our moderator, Iulia Duca, Program Officer within the Climate Action Division at the International Organization for Migration at HQ, Geneva, Switzerland.
Can you hear me? Well, okay. Thank you very much, Helen, and thank you very much to our distinguished speakers for the opening remarks. As Helen mentioned, my name is Iulia Duca. I come from Geneva, and I'm delighted to be here in Suriname with all of you, and of course to moderate this conversation on the youth migration and climate change today. And actually, this is a very timely conversation, since for the young people today and for the generation to come, climate emergency will definitely be the defining feature of their future. As we know, the Caribbean region is home to more than 11 million youth between the age of 15 and 29 years old. And this in the context of the Caribbean being one of the regions most vulnerable to climate change. Due to its geographic location, the region has historically been vulnerable already to frequent and intense climate change-induced hazards, but yet the Caribbean's population, including youth, are experiencing now extensive loss and damage today due to significant sea level rise, stronger hurricanes, or longer dry season, among others. As we know, young people and communities in the Caribbean see themselves being relocated away from rising sea levels or choose to move as an adaptation strategy in the case of droughts, for example, or see themselves being displaced due to sudden onset hazards such as hurricanes. Young people as a group are one of the most vulnerable ones to the impact of climate change, and they face specific challenges during their migration or displacement experience, especially as this occurs at a crucial time in their emotional, cognitive, and social development. Climate change, at the same time, intersects with all dimensions of mobility, being negative or being positive, like, for example, from trafficking and smuggling to labor and health dimension. And this complex challenge cannot be tackled in isolation. Now more than ever, we definitely need strong partnerships with government, with civil societies, with communities, affected persons, and of course, young people need to be a foundational part of this engagement and conversations. Therefore, there is need to provide a space for dialogue and engagement with young people being at the center in order to bring the forefront of national, regional, and international concerns the challenges and opportunities that the young people are facing today when moving in the context of climate change or disasters. We are witnessing not only the vulnerabilities of young people, but also a very active generation today that is fully aware of the challenges the world is facing because of the climate crisis, and are very much knowledgeable of the opportunities that lay ahead of us. Youth voices and ideas were an integral part of the COP conversation in the past year, but yet much more needs to be done to ensure a sustainable engagement of young people and to fully recognize youth as effective partners in addressing climate change impacts, including on human mobility, and their key role, of course, in building resilience in their communities. With this being said, I'm very happy to open the discussion here and to introduce our distinguished panelists today. So very briefly, I will give the floor to each one of you to introduce yourselves. No, here to you. Yes.
put it in. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome in Suriname. My name is Shelina Leengaard. I am part of the Aurae tribe, Indigenous tribe, also known as the Lakota tribe. It's one of the 4 major tribes here in Suriname. And I work for the Association of Indigenous Village Leaders in Suriname, formerly known as VIDS. And VIDS represents the 54 indigenous communities throughout the country. And by strengthening their traditional authorities and leaderships and supporting their communities with different projects, but also supporting their cooperation within regions and in strengthening political and social participation in political and social processes. But our main goal is to obtain legal recognition of indigenous land rights and other rights. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Oh, too close. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joel Simpson, and I'm the Managing Director at SASOD Guyana. SASOD Guyana is a human rights organization and movement leading change, educating, and serving communities to end discrimination based on sexuality and gender in Guyana and the Caribbean.
Hi, everyone. I'm David Hilton from the Jamaica Climate Change Youth Council. Thank you. And the JCCYC does work all across the island in Jamaica on climate change. We go into communities and try to help with these issues that can cause migration before it happens. Communities that don't have access to light or water, we try to use sustainable methods, renewable energy, water collection, grey water harvesting. We engage youth volunteers to come up with the solutions that can help their own communities, because really people from their area, they already have the solutions in mind, they just need the support. So we have a network of support for them, and we try to educate and reach as far as we can.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nurafni Salons, and I am a climate change and environmental advocate for over 10 years. I am the managing director of the Aurae Opus Foundation, the Foundation for Climate, Environment, and Sustainable Development in Suriname. We are mostly focused on climate change awareness and capacity building, especially within youth groups and marginalized communities. Thank you.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. It's so nice to be back in Suriname. I'm from Guyana. I'm Christine Sumwaru, and I'm the founder and managing director of the Breadfruit Collective, which is an intersectional organization that tries to address gender and environmental justice. And so migration is one of those issues that intersects, so we definitely talk and look for solutions. Thank you.
A pleasant afternoon to everyone. I am Judy Sango, and I serve as the current president of the Dominica Association of Persons with Disabilities. The Dominica Association of Persons with Disabilities is an organization in the Commonwealth of Dominica who for the last 40 years has committed itself to creating an all-inclusive society for Dominicans with disabilities. The Dominica Association of Persons with Disabilities serves all persons throughout the Commonwealth of Dominica with various disabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to our distinguished panelists today for the brief introduction. Okay, perfect. So now let's launch into the conversation, as we have ahead of us a bit of time to dive into the discussion and hear more from your perspectives. What does it mean, youth engagement in your particular countries? And of course, we invite our participants here in the room and those online to join us for this conversation. So let's remind it's a conversation, and we want to hear as well your voices and your ideas on the topic. So, without further ado, allow me to address you, Shailina, a question and start with you. So what are the opportunities in your country and the Caribbean region on human mobility and climate change issues?
Yes. For Suriname, we only have 500,000 inhabitants, and mostly along our coastal area. So that means that we will be facing coastal floods, and climate change issues have reshaped human mobility. So the opportunities for Suriname would be to explore and engage more nature-based and sustainable solutions, as well as adaptation measurements. And on a national level, where some of these are already carried out, because there are a lot of opportunities where there's a large amount of financing to engage the possibilities of how to protect our coastline. For example, by planting mangroves in our coastal area to prevent the seawater coming inwards and to prevent climate mobility. But also opportunities to go further on higher grounds. But this might also cause collision because, for example, if they come in the areas where indigenous people are inhabitant, and this might cause a collision because indigenous people's collective land rights are not yet legally recognized in our constitution. And for the mobility for indigenous communities, indigenous people are known to be guardians of nature. So therefore, they also have their own traditional knowledge and mobility and way of living, how to maintain and protect the forest. So for them, the issues of climate change will not be spared. For example, the indigenous people in the South region, they also experience extreme drought and persisting floods causing the ground to saturate, which causes the crops to eventually die, and this endangers their food security. So even though they have practiced persistency measures to go higher to higher areas, but still within their village, they still need support in how to, for example, plant more and harvest more, but also to process it. For example, they plant cassava, that's also known as yuca, and then in the process they make cassava bread. It can be maintained for a longer period of time, but they need the support to also be able to have these possibilities for processing it. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for replying to the question and for acknowledging and for providing solutions on how to protect the coastlines in Suriname, and for also pinpointing on the importance of the indigenous communities' knowledge in addressing the issue, also the challenges that they face. So thank you very much for this. Now, Joel, allow me to address to you another question. If you can provide us a bit of oversight of who are basically the main counterparts that need to participate in this type of conversation from your perspective. Thank you.
Thanks. I think when we talk about youth participating in these conversations around climate-induced migration, we need to think very inclusively and to think about vulnerable youth especially being at the table and being part of the conversations. At the policy level, we tend to engage the mainstream youth organizations, which is great because they'll have certain amounts of capacity and they can articulate the issues at a certain level. But the climate crisis demands an intersectional response. It brings to bear the urgency of the climate crisis demands that we have both an environmental and a human rights response. I was listening to the poem from COP28 and the young people talking about integration of social equity. So for me, it's very important that vulnerable youth are included and are part of the conversation. And what do I mean when I say vulnerable youth? I'm talking about young people whose socioeconomic circumstances, even without the climate crisis, make them more susceptible to human rights violations. They're often not reached with services, and systems of protection which are supposed to exist don't benefit them in the same way as they do for other young people who are not on the fringes of society. Specifically, Indigenous youth, young people who are homeless and displaced, and people can be homeless and displaced for a number of reasons, as we know, for those of us who work in the areas related to migration. Young people who have been and continue to come in conflict with the law, and also another group of marginalized youth that have to be engaged. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer youth, young sex workers, young people with disabilities. Those are some of the groups that are particularly vulnerable because of their existing socioeconomic circumstances, especially in Guyana and the Caribbean. And depending on where you are in the region, there might be other groups that I didn't mention. So it's definitely not an exhaustive list. But I think the crux of the matter is that these conversations must be inclusive, and they shouldn't leave out any group of marginalized youth.
Yes, thank you very much. And I totally agree the conversation needs to be inclusive and to make sure that when it comes to the young people, as we know, they are not a homogeneous group as per se, and there are many things that need to be considered, their vulnerabilities, and everything should be brought at the table and be considered when we discuss different policies, especially in the context of climate change and their mobility. So thank you very much for your inputs and for your consideration on the topic and on the discussions. And now we open the floor to our other distinguished panelists here today, if they want to reflect on the interventions from our colleagues here, and of course to the public and those colleagues online attending. Please feel free to intervene and to share your experience when it comes to the opportunities in the countries to engage on the topic, or who you consider could be the other counterparts that need to participate in this type of conversation. Yes, please.
Thank you. I definitely agree with Joel and what he said about inclusion. And I think when we're doing this intersectional work, we always have to ask ourselves, who is missing and how can we bring them and for them to be a part of their, share their realities. We're not supposed to speak on people's behalf. So I think for us, we always have to have that lens of always making sure that we're making space. And as an intersectional feminist, we have this principle of thinking abundantly, of thinking that there is enough room for everyone. And when you're thinking abundantly, when you're thinking about everybody, that's where you get the diverse solutions. And people who are closest to the problem, they're the ones who actually have the solutions.
Thank you very much, Christine, for replying and these important questions. And I totally agree with you. The people that are like actually facing the problem also have the solutions, and we really need to listen to this. Okay, thank you. Please.
Thank you very much. I have a question following these remarks on the need to incorporate youth of various groups and various dimensions, right? I'm wondering, and looking at the examples that Joel mentioned, what about the case in which youth may not be organized, right? Because we're sort of thinking about, right, engaging with organizations, with associations, with groups, right? But some of the cases that Joel mentioned, maybe we don't have structures, right? And I'm wondering whether you could maybe expand a bit on how do we engage with non-organized groups, to put it somehow, right? And maybe that's not the right formulation, right? But how do we go about these cases in which there's no representation necessarily to bring them to the table? Thanks.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Yes, please, Joel. Over to you.
I think this is where some of the more organized youth-led groups can play a role, and some of the larger kind of youth coalitions, charging them with reaching out and engaging, and there are different ways to collect people's inputs and so on, community consultations, surveys. It could be a lot more formal depending on the resources that you have. But just going out and listening to people, I know a lot of the work that, for instance, that the Breadfruit Collective does in Guyana is premised around that kind of reaching people where they are and going out into communities, meeting in a park or under a tree and having these conversations with groups who might not be at a conference. And I think collecting those kinds of inputs, documenting them, and feeding it up through the information chain so that they get to spaces and they get to rooms like this is one way that that could be done.
Just to add, because you asked the question of how, is there an issue with providing capacity building for such organizations that you're saying are underdeveloped or more scattered than you'd like? Because yes, you can go to the established organizations that are already doing the work, but then a lot of grassroots organizations get ignored. And yes, they may be disorganized, but because they are a group of volunteers and everyone else has their day jobs, we do need a lot of support in capacity building, in grant funding, requesting grants, in building up from volunteer to trying to get enough resources that it can be something that they can do full time, or they can engage in networks for. So for my organization, we are a full volunteer organization. So to hear people ask about, what do you do? How do you engage the youth when it doesn't seem as organized? And we are also struggling to organize. It's pretty much the solution is in the question of we're trying to get organized. You want organized groups, please help wherever you can with capacity building.
Yes, just to add on, climate change, how do you engage more youths? Sometimes certain terms are sound like a new phenomenon, especially for those who live further away and not close to the coastal area where you can receive all the information by internet or by other social medias. So it's a bit challenging because then you have to translate what is climate change in other terms that they understand, because they do experience it. They do see that their crops are dying. They do see that the animals are pulling further away. It's hotter, or areas keep flooding. So they do experience this, but they don't know what the term is. So for us at VIDS, what we do is that most information is in English, so we try to translate it to their traditional languages and explain it to them, and also ask them for solutions. And in that way, they also participate and engage on how they see to maintain their sustainability in their villages. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much for participating in what it is the conversation today on this. And I totally agree with you, the importance of capacity building, especially for young people, and of course, acknowledging the language barriers when it comes to the topic, especially when it comes to indigenous communities, they speak their native language and so on. So all these, both opportunities and challenges need to be considered when we address this kind of discussion. So thank you very much for this. So, if no other questions, yes, please, over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jeremy Grant from Guyana. I'm going to be a devil's advocate, not the devil. How do we make the topic of climate change relevant to young people? A lot of our young people are caught up in a lot of social issues that are more in the fad, right? We prefer to go to a dancehall show. We prefer to go and chill out at the corner and deal with things that are more popular, so to speak. Climate change is not a bread and butter issue to many young people. So how do you frame that conversation? How do you get them to see climate change is a consequential question, a consequential issue to bring them on the campaign? Because we're in the room knowing the importance of why climate change is important, but for them, they're on a hustle, right? They got to put food on the table, they got to send the children to school. It doesn't matter to them. How do you frame that? And it speaks to all the different groups here, right? So how do we make it important to them to get them on the bandwagon?
Over to our panelists, if you want to reflect on the question.
When I talk about climate change, exactly what you said, like people are on the hustle, they care about the now, and that's what I care about. I want to know, what do they care about? What makes them happy? So when I'm working with young people, I talk about my interests in climate and gender, but I also want to know about their interests, what makes them passionate, what do they care about, what's the issue that's burdening them the most. I want them to bring their whole self into this conversation about climate justice. And so even if I'm advertising a program or a conference or a seminar, I'm making sure that I'm putting in like brackets, like this is for someone who cares about youth development, mental health, employment. These are all issues that are tied to climate change and climate justice. And I always tell them, when I'm talking about climate justice, we're talking about justice and social justice. And when we're talking about social justice, this affects people at the most vulnerable stages. And I tell them that they're advocates in their own right. So they can speak. As much as I'm educated in this topic, they are coming in and teaching me as much as I can give to them. And so I like to break down the way in which I'm including young people. I'm seeing them as an expert in their own right. I'm breaking down where we meet. Joel mentioned like meeting in an open space where it's accessible to them so they're not intimidated by the space itself, and also making it a space where young people feel like their voices are valued and it's important. It's okay that they have so many different interests. That's totally okay, and climate change can be one of it because they're living it.
To add on breaking it down for them, because you said it's not a bread and butter issue to them, but it is a bread and butter issue because it affects their job prospects. It affects the agricultural community, the fisheries community. So it's just about letting them know that this is the reason why you're seeing a decrease in the fish population. And it's because of the coral bleaching and the warmer temperatures in the water. And this is why your farm it's so hard and tough for you to be toiling in the sun, and it's all coming up dry and brittle. So yeah, we do have those conversations, and they are able to tell us that they do this to combat this. So then you have to include their findings in your research or in your what you are trying to do as well. Because they may not be doing it in a way that they're like, oh, climate change is coming and I'm doing this. They're doing it in a way that I realize over the years that this thing is happening, and so they have solutions. They just have a different type of conversation with you. And it may not be in English, as you said. We all have our local creoles and dialects and languages. So yeah, it's a variety of things, but we try our best to reach people where they are.
Hi, I heard you mention something about the youth like to have fun and they like partying, and actually they don't like to actually think about this type of issues, which is understandable because if you think about it, it can become quite depressing and sad. But what if we create awareness, because it all comes back to awareness, what if we create awareness in the language that they understand? For example, you can have that same backyard party. You can have that. But then you involve the youth in, for example, bringing your own bottle in the small things like biodegradable materials for the party. And for example, that you don't have too much waste and all the other little aspects that you can include into such an event, which creates awareness on a small level, but it works like a seed. So I would say, if we want to involve youth a bit more into these global issues, we have to do that in a language that they understand. Yeah.
Just to say that it's adding to that because you reminded me, some of it isn't that small either. There is a concert in Jamaica, the Earth Hour concert. During that time of the year that we have the Earth Hour where you're supposed to turn off all your lights and use your candles, we have a concert for that. So people bring their candles, and as you say, it's all bring your own bottle. There's no waste there's not much waste that is generated like usual for a concert. Even Sumfest, the biggest concert in Jamaica, is now going green in a sense that they are encouraging people to bring their own cups and bottles so that they use the nozzle instead of a lot of plastic being generated. So, you know, it's small steps, but it's now for those larger groups, corporations, to then reach out to people like us. And we did actually partner with them for the Earth Hour concert. We were able to speak to the crowd about deep sea mining, and they were very receptive. And so that's when they started to realize that, hey, we can start to incorporate different groups to come and teach you something in between the songs and the sets. Because yes, people want to relax and have fun, and we're Caribbean people, but there can be a mixture.
Just to add on, as you said, youths have other interests. So for me, raising awareness is a very good option, especially hitting them where the heart packs. By telling them and showing them as well that these are the consequences that have taken place in other countries and in other areas, and this is what also can happen to you. How do you want to go to work if your work's not there anymore? How do you want to bring your child to school when the school's not there anymore? So even though you don't want to engage or you don't want to be involved, or you're too busy, everybody's busy, and you don't have time to listen or what the effects are of climate change on your daily lives, then you will tremendously be hit with the effects of it.
Thank you to all for this enriching conversation. We have just one intervention from the floor, and then we go to the next round of questions. Over to you, please. Thank you.
Hello. All right. Ooh, I'm loud. One of the questions, something Joel said, encouraged me to just share something very short, and I would love to hear from youth representatives here. I have a colleague named Mariella, and she usually traverses some of the lesser-known waterfalls in Trinidad, and she engages with poor families and communities that go to the waterfalls, and she observes them littering. And in these spaces also, you find people dump a lot of white waste and e-waste as well, too. And she was giving me the story, and I think sometimes because we're in these spaces, we tend to forget, or we use the word ignorance and not educated enough, that she was explaining to these children that the waterfall goes to the river and the river goes to the ocean, and they did not know that. They said, "Miss, we didn't even know that." So children turn into youth, and do you think one of the barriers we have in the Caribbean is the fact that our education system is still far behind in what we teach our children? And what do you think the young adults, I don't like to call you all youth, young adults' role is to support a change in curriculum or improvement in curriculum, which is taking far too long to upgrade to meet these needs for capacity building? Thank you.
Thank you for these questions. We will have at the end of the conversation a Q&A section, but over to you if you want to briefly reply to this, and then we move further. Thank you.
Sure, briefly, because I don't have a perfect answer, but I am a teacher, and I do try to incorporate in my lesson, as I was taught to do, incorporate different themes in my lesson. I teach English, but then you can incorporate other themes in the English lesson, and part of that includes environmentalism. I learned that growing up as well. My teachers taught in that way. So it is actually a part of the curriculum. In Jamaica it is. It's just the practice isn't as updated as the documentation that we have, where documentation is perfect and beautiful and wonderful. And then there's nothing to, what's the word? There's no checks and balances. Teachers can do anything in their class, and there is no way for anyone else outside of it to know what's going on. So that's the part that I would say that we would need more attention on right now. Assessments, external and internal, more support for teachers in classes. So it really shouldn't just be one teacher in a class, to be honest. Most of our classes have 50 students. There should be a teacher and a teacher's aide. Then you can have more eyes on what's really happening. So it makes no sense that we have in all these documents that this is what should be happening, and then in reality it's not what's happening. Then we also have to remember the pandemic happened. Teaching right now, I started in October. Teaching right now is very different from when I was on teaching practice before the pandemic. The students are, the common knowledge that you're talking about, just waterfall to river, you're about to see, it's abysmal what they're going through right now. The students are struggling, the teachers are struggling, parents are struggling. So there's something that needs to happen, and a conversation that needs to happen about what the pandemic did and what we were falling behind before, and how we can address everything to then, put forward something else, because it's not working right now. Not just on environmentalism, on literally everything. Any sort of civic duty is deteriorating, and I'm very scared about what happens when this graduating class leaves, and we start to feel the effects of what's been happening in our education system.
Thank you very much. So we are falling a bit behind, so let's move forward to the next topic. You're already anticipating a bit of the conversation, but it's very nice to see how the conversation is shaping. So now, if you allow me, I'll address to Christine now. Thank you. So Christine, if you can tell us what are the opportunities for climate action in the Caribbean to help reach social equity and climate justice?
Thank you so much. So the climate crisis, migration, and all the injustices that comes with displacement is real. And so we have to talk about it as it is happening right now, right in our own Caribbean community in Haiti. We have to talk about and use an international lens of, global genocides that are taking place. And I like to say that when we're talking about youth and youth involvement, we're definitely not a monolith. We require different things, and we carry various identities and realities that would aid in these solutions. And I always like to say Caribbean youths and youth in general, I think we put so much burden on them to carry the load, and we have taken on the challenge, but I think there is a need for more spaces to include youths and this intergenerational conversation that needs to happen between older generation and the current generation when we're thinking about this work and how we go about it inclusively. We have to think about it as abundantly as I mentioned before, and we also need to be engaged meaningfully, so not a one-time thing, but also understanding that inclusion happens, it takes a while, it takes as long as it takes. And we talked about children previously in one of the questions. Youth and children, they're very different, and they're very different entities that needs to be engaged. And I think they're both vulnerable groups, and therefore they need to be engaged in age-appropriate means by talking about the environment, but doing so in a way whereby you're emphasizing it is a despairing topic, but at the same time there's hope, and there is diversity, there's innovation. They are already living in a climate-changing world, so they are already aware of the impacts. So when you're talking about it, you have to talk about it in a way that would inspire and inspire hope.
Thank you very much, Christine, for this. And exactly what you mentioned, that both children and youth as groups are not a homogeneous group, so as I was already mentioning, and their needs are exactly the same. So we need to look very much specifically to their needs and vulnerabilities when it comes to their age consideration and so on. But also, of course, you mentioned about the engaging of youth, which is not just ticking the box and bringing them at the table, but really making this sustainable in time and really have them as part of the conversation. And of course, their ideas being considered and implemented, and not just listen to the young people, but really taking their advices into consideration. So thank you very much for this. Allow me now to address to Judy. So Judy, if you can tell us how should the youth and vulnerable groups be better included for innovation actions addressing climate mobility? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question.
Judy, if you can speak a bit closer to the microphone for those listening online as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Youth and vulnerable groups can be better included for innovative actions addressing climate mobility through several approaches. Permit me to share a few with you. Firstly, education and awareness. Providing education and creating awareness about climate change and its impact on mobility among youth and vulnerable groups is crucial. This can be done through workshops, seminars, campaigns, and educational programs focused on climate change and sustainable transportation. Inclusion in decision-making processes comes secondly. Ensuring the active participation of youth and vulnerable groups in decision-making processes related to climate mobility is important. Their voices and perspectives should be heard and considered in shaping policies, strategies, and innovative solutions. Empowerment through capacity building comes thirdly. Youth and vulnerable groups should be provided with the necessary skills, knowledge, and resources to actively participate in addressing climate mobility challenges. This can be done by organizing training programs, providing access to learning materials, and encouraging entrepreneurship in the field of sustainable transportation. Collaboration and partnership comes next. Foster collaborations and partnerships between youth, vulnerable groups, and government bodies, including non-governmental organizations and the private sector. Encourage cross-sectoral partnership to share knowledge, ideas, and resources, fostering innovation and ensuring a holistic approach to addressing climate mobility. Funding support comes next. Provide financial assistance to youth and vulnerable group-led initiatives and projects tackling mobility challenges. This will encourage and support innovative actions, enabling youth and vulnerable groups to develop and implement sustainable transportation solutions. 6, representation in policy planning. Ensure that youth and vulnerable groups have a seat at the table when it comes to policy and planning for climate mobility. This can be achieved by creating a dedicated youth councils or advisory boards that actively contribute to designing and implementing climate-friendly transportation policies. Lastly, mentorship and guidance. Establish programs connecting experienced professionals with youth and vulnerable groups interested in working on climate mobility initiatives. This will provide valuable insights, encouragement, and support to young innovators and groups. By implementing these strategies, youth and vulnerable groups can actively participate in addressing climate mobility challenges, driving innovation, and contributing to transportation solutions that are sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy, for the intervention. And considering the time that we have, I propose we go now to the next topic, and then we open a bit the floor to reflect on the questions and to take some other intervention from the persons attending online. So considering this, Davia, over to you now. If you can please let us know what support do you need to strengthen the engagement on climate-induced migration. Thank you, over to you.
Thank you. We addressed some of this before, but youth climate groups do need capacity building, and we can't stress it enough. It is a lot of volunteer work, and you do need structure to be able to make it financially viable for people to actually continue the work, because it is a lot of burnout that occurs with the group, with the few people that keep coming back over and over again to do the work. So we do need people to help with the structure of new NGOs, help with grant funding, help with sharing the information as well, because while we can go into communities and do the grassroots work, it's more impactful if we can then get that to build off of that. If it's a one-stop with one community, then there is no progress that happens. So you go into a community, you solve this issue, and then after it deteriorates because there are other people coming up who have not been educated in this or not in this issue or whatever it is. Just as you say, the littering that happens there, the fishing community when they're overfishing and not adhering to the laws. It's something that it's a continued relationship that has to happen. So the groups that have the most success are the ones that are able to do that. So like fish sanctuaries in Jamaica are doing a very good job. They're able to have a continued relationship with the fisher folk. But other grassroots organizations, you come in, you volunteer your time, and then you have to go back to work. So it needs to be more consistent. Conversations like this are great because then you find the people who are already doing the work and you try to fund what they're doing and you try to hear from them. So there becomes a space for them to then broadcast what they have been doing already. So it creates more networking, more relationships are building here. So thank you for IOM for that. You need also legislative support as well, space, as Judy was saying, in making legislation. Whenever that comes up, it's usually, well, I can only speak for Jamaica, it's usually just a couple of days before you hear that they're going to look at this legislation, and then you have to read through this thick document, and then you're thinking of your own job, you're thinking of school, if you're still studying. And it becomes, it's just so difficult. So the processes have to change. They have to include a lot more time, and then include a lot more space for civil society to speak. It's usually just a few select groups, and it's usually people who are already in the know. We do have a youth council, a national youth council as well, which is one of the suggestions that Judy has. But it's become something that is for people who are interested in career development rather than interested in the environment or solving issues for their community. So they get in, do what they can to network, and then get out. So it's self-serving, and it's great that they're able to then get out of whatever situation they're in, but it's individualistic. So there needs to definitely be more community engagement in, if you're going to have, say, a national response to try to include youth in legislation, there needs to be more community level considerations. And yeah.
Thank you very much for replying to the questions, for walking us through all these considerations. Now allow me to address to Nuravni. Yes. Dear Nuravni, if you can tell us how should youth be included in decision-making process from your perspective? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question, because this is a really good question. There are many approaches that we can have to this question, and that is, if we think in terms of civil society, I would say that we need to establish or create more platforms such as foundations, associations, clubs, where youth can come together and deliberate, especially about these global issues. Also, the associations that are already currently working in the field should also be strengthened more. And that's why I'm also happy to be here, because I'm here together with other youth from civil society in the region, and I think they all deserve applause because of all the work they've been doing from the ground on. Yeah. I would say the second approach would be that we should establish a youth constituency where youth are there together as a collective on a national, regional level, and that the constituency has a vote in the system to vote on law and regulation and the creation of law and regulation. I would say that that is something that might happen in the future, and before that happens, we need to change the law and the regulations, the existing law and regulations. But after all these are nice ideas, and before they actually can be realized, we need to work on our awareness among youth. Like I mentioned earlier, when we talk to youth, when we want youth involved into these issues, in these global issues, we need to do it in a language that they understand. There are many approaches that we can do that, but I will highlight today the use of creativity and creative expression, where youth can use these creative expression methods to state their voices and share their thoughts about global issues that are actually happening, like climate change, climate-induced migration. We should actually, for example, create more opportunities such as, let's say, essay competitions and poster competitions and painting competitions, where youth from different ages on, 6, 4, 5 year, 10, and older, teenagers can actually think about these topics, put it into a creation, like an artwork or an essay work, and actually share their voices, state their voices about these issues, I would say. And eventually, that's how you, like I said before, plant a seed. You plant a seed by doing that. And when these children and youth become in positions later on in life, they are aware of it from a young age on and can help with decision making, and you are ensured that they will make the right decision by then. I would say that climate-induced migration will happen regardless. Recently, I learned that the 1.5 degrees Celsius mark that we have been talking about for so long has actually already passed. And for a country like Suriname, where more than 80% of the population is located in the coastal zone area, and we have a low coastal zone area, you can already put one and one together, what will happen eventually. So I would say that it is important to start now, include youth, approach them in ways like Christine mentioned, in a language that they understand already. And yeah, we have to involve them in the best way we can. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. And indeed, like, I think education is key, starting from a very early age, to involve children and young people, to count on their creativeness and innovative ideas, and to really take this forward. So thank you very much for the intervention. Considering the time, we already have some questions online, so we will be able to take a few of these questions addressed to our panelists here before we wrap up. So one of the questions is related to the strategies. Well, which strategies can be used in the Caribbean countries to engage with LGBTQ plus youth population on these matters of migration and climate change, especially where LGBTQ plus issues are not only openly discussed and accepted in the Caribbean, alone prevents them to fully enjoy their human rights. Please, over to you.
I don't think the strategies for LGBTIQ populations would necessarily be completely unique than to any other marginalized youth group that you might be working with. It will depend on your country context, and we have used different strategies around community mobilization before to tackle other issues, and we've learned those lessons. HIV being one of them. The strategies that we use for community mobilization and reaching communities that are criminalized and heavily under siege, face a lot of violence, face a lot of discrimination. We use peer-led navigation. We use peers to reach peers. We train peers as leaders on these issues to be able to educate their populations as well. Support groups, and discussion groups that take place within communities and so on. So I think a lot of strategies for groups that are driven underground will have to be led by communities themselves, because these groups will not be very trusting of outsiders who would come to engage with them, especially state actors in a context where they remain criminalized and they're also targeted by other agents of the state in the Caribbean context. So with respect to LGBTIQ populations, I think it's similar as well for groups like young sex workers. There would be similar constraints, and other kinds of socially stigmatized groups, young people living with HIV and so on. Very, very similar strategies of working with community-led organizations that represent and work with these populations and empowering them to do the work with their own communities.
Thank you very much, Joel, for reflecting on this question. So if no other intervention on this, we have another questions from participants online. So the question would be, are there any statistics available on the demographic changes in the Caribbean, especially a country like Suriname, due to climate change? So we come now to the statistics and to data when it comes to the topic. So if any reflections from your side or from participants in the room, of course, please. Yes. Please.
Jan-Willem Bergdam, IOM Suriname. As far as I know, no, there are no statistics available. I do know that the government is planning to conduct a census this year, so hopefully more will come out this year. And IOM is planning to do a profiling of migrants early next year. So also then we know more about migrant groups and their intentions of staying, but also of moving over.
Yes, thank you very much for the intervention on this question. So now we also open the floor for other intervention on the discussion, on the conversation, either from the participants here in the room or online, or our panelists, if they want to reflect on what has been discussed. Yes, we have two interventions from the room. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes. Good day, everyone. My name is Aurae. I'm from the Youth Council of Suriname. I'm here with a few other colleagues. I want to add something to what one of the people here said. They said we need to reach young people and to speak their language. But when we reach young people, it's also important that the older generations that already walked the path, already have experience in a certain kind of stuff, that they also give room to young people to express themselves. Because when you train them and when you guide them, it is time for them to express themselves and to show themselves, right? So it's important that the older generations give room to young people so they can do what they need to do, because at the end of the day, young people are the next in line after the older generations. Concerning thereof, it's also important that young people also know that we also need to train the parents so they know how to guide their children, because I can train you as a younger person, but when you go home and there's a certain situation at home that influences you as a young person,
recording stopped,
then you are still in the same cycle. So I think that also the parents need to be informed about the state of their child. They also need to have some basic life skills, so they need to guide their children in the right path. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the intervention. We have another participant that would like to take the floor, so please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you for allowing a young person like me to take the floor.
Yes, if you can please keep the mic closer. Thank you.
I'm Vanya David from Dominica, and you can see I am young plus, I do not have to tell you. So thank you, young people, for having the young table, which is very appreciative. My question would come after somebody who said they are the devil's advocate, and that's not what I want to be. I'll never be, but I'm still running the question. Allowing the young persons to take their space. And then my friend on my table just said, the older generation making the space for the young persons. Of course, I believe and I have seen, with all respect, that the older persons have made the space for the young persons within all sectors. But it comes back to one of the answers that somebody gave on the table, that how do you engage a young person within a conversation that is not the conversation that the person is interested in. For example, we say youth, but we have different categories, and my friend said that there are lists of youths. Afflict youth. How do you address afflict youth into migration? That's what they want to hear. They do not want to hear the other conversation. How do you take me from Dominica to wherever the Olympic is, the other conversation? It would be forced. And so how do you see the peer pressure of youth wanting youth into joining another conversation where they're really not interested? And so take us to that table, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. If our panelists would like to reflect on these two interventions, please. Yes, we have another participant that would like to join the conversation. Please.
Yes, sorry, my name is Edward Michel.
Yes.
I'm from Adra, Curaçao. I'd like to somewhat give an answer to that and to couple with something that came earlier. This year in Carnival, of course, Carnival in Caribbean is Carnival. The organization that was responsible for the organization of the Carnival Fest, for them to do the fundraising, they came up with a cup, a reusable cup with the Carnival theme and everything, and it was sold to everybody, of course, to get the funding, but also they used it to raise the awareness on sustainability. So the youth that are like eager to go and party now were presented, okay, you can support this big festival in a sustainable way. So the message of sustainability was given to the youth in a language, in something that they're interested in. And I'm also saying, okay, the young are also part of a family. So if their family have issue with crops and with economic issues, they feel it at home. So you can also use the channel of your families are suffering in this and that other way. And of course, it reaches them because they also have to care for a family, etc., etc. They are also consumers. So as consumers, as young consumers, some products might become too expensive. Some products maybe are not available. Why? Maybe it's because of climate change. So you can connect the dot there for the young to understand, hey, it's not something that's so distant. My family has that issue. Me, myself, that product I love, I have that issue. So speak to us in a way, or we of course are doing it, in a way that they feel it, you know? And on the topic of also inclusion, I say sometimes the young are encouraged to and allowed to voice, but they are not encouraged and empowered to do. And if you're not allowed to do also, like already came forward, you don't feel the sense of belonging. And if you don't feel the sense of belonging in the solving community, the crew that solves the issues, you don't feel the responsibility to participate in solving the issue. So the idea came up about the constituency. I would say also maybe make it in a law that like maybe 5% or maybe 10%, I don't know, maybe more, of the government and parliaments and executive in other NGOs and also other governmental organizations need to be comprised of young people. So let's say maybe people 25 and younger, because you're encouraged to study, to build up your capacities, gain knowledge and everything, but then you're set aside. And that is, of course, it hinders what we would like to accomplish. So if you don't connect that, there's no synergy and it won't work.
Yes, thank you very much for this grateful intervention from our participants here in the room. I see other hands raising, but allow me also to acknowledge one of the participants online who made a reflection on the discussion today. So Justo Ortega mentions the fact that development, implementation, and promotion of university careers specialized in climate change in the Caribbean is key to combating this reality. And we cannot agree more. So thank you very much for this intervention from our participant online. So now, to one of our participants here in the room, the floor is yours.
Recording in progress.
Is it on? Yes, yes.
Yes.
So thank you to all of the panelists for all of your presentations. They certainly were thought-provoking, and it, particularly for persons of a certain age. The one thing I wanted to hear, which I haven't heard, so I want to introduce this to you, is the manner in which you take national issues, because all of you are representing different countries in the region, and take those national issues across the region and engage with your peers in other countries. Can you speak to that? What have you done to accomplish that? And what do you think is needed in order to accomplish that if it has not been done already? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to respond to this.
Please, Judy, the floor is yours.
Well, in my country, since I am fully into disability rights advocacy, I remembered that when the COVID-19 pandemic began in Dominica, I was concerned for young persons with disabilities and how the pandemic would have affected not just young people with disabilities in my country, but throughout the region. And I'm happy to inform you that I have since went ahead and created an NGO called Youth with Disabilities Connections that serves young people throughout the Caribbean region with various disabilities. Another thing that I think should be done in the Caribbean is the collaboration between various NGOs. It is okay for each organization to have its own agenda, but why not collaborate and solve many issues at once? There are some issues that can be solved with just a little bit of collaboration. So I want to employ each and every person here who is a part of a civil society organization, to look at ways in which you can collaborate with not just other organizations in your country, but throughout the Caribbean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy, for intervening and for bringing these valuable points. So we will need to wrap up soon. So I see participants here in the room are very eager to engage in this conversation. So we might be able to take very briefly one or two more. Please, the floor is yours.
Also, good day, everyone. My name is Geneva Becker from the National Institute for Environment and Development in Suriname, and GCI Unify. So there were a lot of remarks made today, and I think the core of what has been discussed here is that awareness is the key. Raising awareness amongst youth is the key. So I often come across youth who share the meaning that they will not be here over about 100 years or 50 to experience the effect of the impact they have on the environment today. Or let's not say the environment, but the impact they have on the climate today. So I would like to know how you would address this situation. Yes, that's the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. Yes, please, over to you.
Yeah, that is indeed a good question, and indeed, youth often ask that to themselves, but also to others, like, what is the purpose of doing this work right now? Because 100 years from now, we'll not be here. I think all of us, you know. But how I look at it, as from a personal standpoint, is that everything that I do now is not for me. It's for my community and for generations to come, for my descendants and generations to come. I think that's very important that we as youth start thinking about that and the purpose that we have on Earth. Because eventually we will have children and they will have children, and it's so on, it will continue. And the question that we should ask each other, I think in everything that we do in life, what will we leave behind for them? Not only on the matters of climate change and migration, but everything that we do. And when we have that answer, I think that we will find our purpose there and continue so in our mission. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Please, we can briefly.
Okay, no problem. I would like to add, because while thinking of the future is great, there are things that are happening right now. So usually if you ask them enough questions, they'll realize that the things that they have been experiencing, complaining about, issues they've been having, is because of stuff that were decided 20 years ago. But they wouldn't know because they're not, well, how we teach history is a boring dates by dates and only for 100 years ago. We're not looking at the contemporary effects of everything that policy decisions, pollution, everything that happened right before, and exactly how it leads directly to this. People can't see it yet. But if you ask them enough questions, they will. And then once they realize that, they'll realize that, one, we're on a chain reaction. No matter what they do now, even if we stopped right now, there is still enough carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for global warming to keep happening. So the chain reaction that we're on, we have to radically do something different to actually change the course of our lifetimes. So it's something that's going to affect us not 20, 50 years down the line. It's affecting us right now, and within the next 5 years, we'll start to really see what's happening. A lot of people see things as disconnected. When they see the floodings happening, they see droughts, they see that food resources are different. Everything is processed. We can't actually get fish like we could just walk on the beach and buy it from a fisherman. It's different now. So things that have changed, you're not seeing the connections. I remember there was a time online when there were a lot of videos of things happening in Europe, like a lot of flooding and stuff. And people were like, oh, this shouldn't happen here. Because they're so used to it happening in countries like Aurae, in Africa, in places that have been oppressed or resources have constantly been extracted from, that when they saw it happening somewhere else, first world developed nations, they didn't see it as something connected. That what was stolen from us has fueled a global disaster that's going to affect all of us. Yes, us first, but everybody eventually. So if we don't start seeing it now, when?
Yes, thank you very much for these great reflections and for a very insightful conversation that we are having today. I think that this conversation can move forward and go on. There are many inputs and many great ideas that participants online in the room and the distinguished panelists, of course, are bringing at the table. But unfortunately, we have limited time, so we will need to approach the wrapping up of this conversation, and I'm very happy to give the floor for some closing remarks to Patrice Quesada, the IOM coordinator for the Caribbean. Patrice, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for being here today.
it was the green light that I needed. All right. First, thank you, Iulia, for having managed that panel. But first of all, a very warm welcome to all of you. It's really great to have all the Caribbean represented in this room. So if we can get a big round of applause for all of you, for all our panelists. Really, thank you for being there. I want to really emphasize, it's just the start of this conversation. We are just starting it because we have another 2 days with most of you to continue that discussion. So that's what we want to do now. We want to continue that discussion, and I really feel that this conversation, what you've done today, has been a very great setting the scene of what will come during the next 2 days. So let me say it's just the beginning, and thank you very much again for that, for bringing the voice of the youth there. I cannot consider myself anymore in that category. I'm losing my hair, as you can see behind. But definitely, if there is one thing I can say about that is once you have children, your relationship with time and the cycle of life, it does change. Your relationship with time in particular, I remember when I was 20, I felt that, wow, I have so much time in front of me, and then you just get this sense that it's just getting faster and faster and faster. And that's the reality of it. You were really right in what you said. Climate change is the reality today, but it's going to be a reality in 20 years, in 30 years. We're basically, us as this generation that is right now supposedly in charge, we are just a placeholder for you to come and you to leave the space to those that will come after you. Because the problem we have with climate change is that it's already there. It's not reversible. It's too late. We failed that. We're talking about this 1.5 degree. We know that 1.5 degree doesn't mean 1.5 degree everywhere. It means that places like the equator, where you already have temperature that are raising and raising, can you imagine what it would be if suddenly we had to spend like a full month with temperature?
Recording stopped.
They do it on purpose because they want me to stop. I know them. 34, 35 degrees with 80% humidities. You know what that makes? That makes 40, 45 degrees. Those are deadly temperatures. It's not a joke. It's something you can die from. So that's really the reality that we're going towards. So there will be migration. There will be places that will not be sustainable anymore for livelihood. And that's why those discussions right now are so essential, because we already need to see how to adapt. What I find very promising is those type of exchanges, because we can see that there is the understanding, there is the willingness. We've asked to start and kickstart these 3 days of discussion to have the younger generation to come to the forefront. In the next 2 days, we will have all representatives of the civil society organization. And you've already mentioned very important elements during the discussion. Some of them are related to the need for inclusiveness. I think one element that I found very great in the moving narrative around climate change is that finally we've linked that with social justice, and that's essential because it's really about leaving no one behind. And we know that there are a lot of human rights fights that are today's fights that still needs to happen, including in the Caribbean for the inclusion of all groups, especially those that are discriminated. So we cannot drop those fights, but we need to understand how that also is compounded by climate change and what can be some of the solutions. Because solutions needs to come from where the issues are happening, and that's where I think it's brilliant to say it like that. It's really about how do you talk to the one that confront the problem to be part of the solutions, because it's for them at the end of the day. Now, what I really hope we're also going to be able to discuss is to dwell further into the capacity building discussion. What does it mean to build capacity? What does it mean to work with proxies? Because you cannot necessarily engage with everyone at the same time in the same space. So you need to find like proxies, participative processes, having the capacity to do that, relying on those that are more structured, how they can bring on board those that are less structured. How to ensure that we have everyone that can have a voice in a way that they feel comfortable with. How they can be heard by all generations. I think for me, one of the big eye-opener for the Caribbean, and I've not been in the region for a long time, was to look at the demographics. For me, demographic plus climate change, those are the two biggest challenges for the Caribbean. Demographics are showing that for most countries, there is a declining population. Not only a declining, but an aging population. In Barbados, there was an article today. We moved from 10% of the population that was in retirement to 16% of the population in retirement. That has a very high cost. It means that young generation are becoming more and more also a minority in the Caribbean, with outward migration, including brain drain that is compounding that problem. This plus climate change, those are really like the two, for me, most significant issues that we need to look at, and looking at it also from a perspective of what does it mean in terms of mobility. Mobility as an adaptation to climate change, mobility as a support for green and blue transition of the economy. So there is a lot of things that also must happen there. Talking about capacity building also, I'd like to just make a small word to thank the French government that has been supporting that project. Also to remind, if you are not aware yet, that we will have also the pleasure of having the French ambassador with us for receptions that he's hosting tomorrow, and also at the end of the day on Friday. We also need then to talk about creating the structure for that engagement to really happen. There's a lot to be said about decision making, and you were touching upon that. I don't think we have the right structure that really allow participation into decision-making process at the end of the day. And we need to look at that. And here, a message from the UN side, and you will hear it tomorrow also from the resident coordinator, is really about like the UN are here to help to support that agenda. Leaving no one behind, for instance, is a very strong agenda for the UN. The digitalization and the data discussion is a very strong one. So we will also like to see through this type of project, this type of discussion, what kind of clear outcome, actionable outcome can come out of it. We're just 5 minutes beyond time, right? Not bad, huh? All right, so let me thank all those that need to be thanked for that. First, all the representatives. A big round of applause again. Thank you really much for bringing your voice to that discussion, for setting the scene also for the next 2 days. And we really look like for this dialogue that we've been having today to replicate that around during the next 2 days. Thank you, Iulia, for the moderation. You've done an excellent job, so thank you so much. Round of applause as well. Come on. All the people also from IOM sitting at the back. Thank you very much for having organized this event. So this has been also including from the team, the coordination team, but also the Suriname office colleagues that have been there. Hélène, of course, that has been managing that whole project. I'm saying that also because this is like the fourth conversation on migration in the Caribbean, fourth iteration that we've been doing, and we're trying to do each time new teams, also doing it in different countries. We were in Antigua in December, and that's really a format that we'd like to promote, to have different discussion. We'd like also to thank the hotel as well, the staff, the technical staff that have been there, STVS also for having broadcasted and recorded that event. So a really big round of applause also to all of you. And to all of you who came and filled that room. Now, we've been talking about the fact that, new technology, they provide great space for virtual engagement that can help connect the Caribbean, because as we know, it's not always easy to travel among those beautiful places. But once we have the opportunity to be together, it's great as well, because networking, making friends, it's really how we can then move this agenda forward together. So please stay with us right now for refreshment, and let's continue that conversation among ourselves. Let's know each other, and let's have fun for the next 3 days, 2 days. Thank you very much.